I will use this as a mirrorless camera replacement because I can then sell that mirrorless camera. At that point, this replaces that. I don't mind admitting I was wrong, especially when it means you're getting better products for it. The Razer Kiyo Pro Ultra breaks through those limits that I said webcams were beholden to and produces something that I honestly didn't think a webcam would reach within the next couple years. I knew it would get there eventually, but I didn't think we were there yet.
It's time for another webcam showdown.
I went ahead and ordered this webcam from Razer Store the second I saw Hardware Connect's CES coverage because it kind of helps show that some of the things that I had assumed about this webcam weren't actually true, and that it was a lot more impressive than I wanted. And I didn't want to wait on review samples or anything like that. I've had some stuff come up on the personal side that prevented me from getting here very quickly, but this webcam is incredible. $300 is a heavy price to pay for a webcam, given that you can spend $100 or $200-ish, usually more, to get a proper mirrorless camera with a lens and a capture card and blah, blah, blah to take pictures with, have better quality. But realistically, this is what we've been waiting for. I'm going to continue pushing the 1-inch sensor and ideally a 4/3 inch sensor for webcams, but Razer has set the bar in the hardware side in a way that I didn't expect to happen. This is a webcam with a 1/1.2 inch sensor, which is actually a fair bit bigger than the Elgato Facecam, the Insta360 Link, and the Nexigo Iris that I covered, all of which had similarly sized sensors to each other. And in my streamer news coverage, when we talked about the CES announcements, I misspoke. I meant to pull this up beforehand, but that doesn't sound any bigger. It is a pretty big sensor. This entire webcam is a chunky boy. It comes with a USB-C cable. I am told it will come with a longer one in the box in the future. The first units had a slightly shorter cable. It has your monitor / quarter 20 thread tap mount, so you can mount it to whatever tripod, mount, arm, or on top of your monitor that you want. I have it on top of a monitor right now. It's got an autofocus lens that doesn't suck like the original Kiyo Pro, and it does 4K and 1080p 60, and it is wild. The first test here, we have all 4 webcams on their default auto modes, which admittedly has me mostly completely overexposed in all 3 webcams. Now my mirrorless camera here, the A7C, is on manual because I'm not going to screw with all my settings to set it back to auto, and no one should be using it on auto. No one should be using these webcams on auto either. We are not getting super great results here. So I'm going to kick it over to manual now. And here we have a 4-way view of 4 different cameras you could potentially get for your webcam. Ignore the frame rate. We are pushing USB chipset, bandwidth at the moment with 4 4K webcams going. But we have the Facecam Pro. We've got the Razer Kiyo Pro Ultra. We've got the Sony A7C with a Sigma of 16mm f1.4 lens, so we're cropped in. And then we have the Insta360 Link. These are on manual exposure settings, but autofocus and auto white balance are still enabled, as getting good manual white balance in a webcam is very difficult without all the proper sliders. In terms of overall pleasingness of the colors of the image out of box, I find the Insta360 Link to lead the pack, with the Elgato Facecam of the webcams. The A7C is the best, but the Insta360 Link is the best looking webcam color-wise, overall look-wise. Facecam Pro is a second for me. Razer Kiyo Pro is in third, but you could tweak these further and do so yourself. And of course, I have a whole video linked below on making your own LUT with a webcam, so you have a consistent, regular, ready-to-go look. This is just the colors out of the box. I do like the sharpness and the clarity of the Razer Kiyo Pro, and you will notice, other than, of course, the A7C, the background is the most kind of pleasingly blurred out here. I did turn off the correction for the bowing, that gives you a slightly wider field of view, and I don't mind it so much. You could add that back in with an OBS plugin, or you could just enable it in the Synapse software. Again, ignore the fluidity. I'll have separate samples for that in just a moment, but I gotta say, I'm pretty impressed. My biggest complaint right now is the Razer Synapse software, which is always the case, but you can't adjust settings while the webcam is open in another program, and the settings don't perfectly match when I open it back up in OBS, so then I have to use the weird UVC controls for the configure video source in OBS, whereas Elgato's Camera Hub app lets me just disable the preview and still control all of the settings in the Camera Hub app. So, here's a nice little focus test. There we go. So, about a foot distance for focus for the Kiyo Pro. I can get right up on the Elgato Facecam and get focus. Back to me. Facecam Pro autofocus is very slow. Kiyo Pro's Facecam is a lot more responsive, and I have it on the slower settings, so it's not jerking all over the place. It's a lot more pleasing of a look. The Facecam Pro spends a lot of time just going, pulsing back and forth. Kiyo Pro spends significantly less. Insta360 Link's autofocus is a little more jerky, but it is the best performing of the bunch other than that jerkiness. If I could tune that a little bit more, that would be nice. I don't see any autofocus like tweaks like the Razer offers. Razer is the only one who offers that, so that's pretty cool too. And this is what the Kiyo Pro looks like in their HDR mode, which uses double the frame rate for double exposure bracketing to make dark and bright areas look decent. I have my overhead kicker light for my hair on just because I left it on. I do not have my main key light on. I am only lit by my monitor. And I have a dark screen up because I use OBS like night mode. There we go. There's a bright screen. I'm gonna turn the backlight off. I have no lights on me. Like, this is pure computer monitor light. So if you're someone who wants a decent quality stream without using lights, I mean, this is what I would prefer to do, right? And it looks a lot better than the original Kiyo Pro did. Yeah, there's sometimes glitches if you have too fast movement, you see here. I'm pretty impressed. Software both makes and kind of breaks this webcam as a purchase, though. This runs through Razer Synapse, which for a lot of people can be a meme, you know, whatever. It's not, it's hit or miss. They have a lot of really cool controls in here for this webcam, though. You've got the bowing compensation. Since it uses such a wide field of view, it starts to bow a little bit. This was the thing on the previous Kiyo Pro that I covered. I have it enabled. It does crop in by like 1.1x, which is standard on a lot of big mirrorless cameras too, and fixes that, or you can just leave it turned off. It has autofocus that you can control different modes for. It obviously has auto versus manual focus. If you just want to, you know, you sit mostly in the same spot from your desk, you can just leave it on manual. But if you want to be able to pop up and like show people stuff on camera, autofocus is going to help you do that. The focus range is kind of far. It's about a foot. It's further than either the Insta360 or the Elgato Facecam, but the focus pulse is a lot better. You also have different modes for tracking. So you have general purpose autofocus, and then you have a face tracking specific mode, which I have enabled here, which is supposed to help you maintain focus on your face a lot better. And in the Hardware Connects video in the hotel room at CES, they were having a lot of autofocus pulsing, and I don't have anywhere near as much with the settings that I have configured right now. They also have different modes in terms of passive versus like super responsive autofocus, as well as lighting type choices. So if you have really bright, just well lit stuff, you can enable that mode, or more stylized lighting. It helps optimize the autofocus for more contrasty looks like I typically do in my videos here. Then you have manual exposure settings, both for the shutter speed and the ISO, which is something that Elgato kind of came first to market for more of the consumer stuff with, that no one else was doing, and was a huge deal. Razer is also doing this now, translating those gain values and everything to proper ISO values like you would on a camera and a shutter speed. So I have it locked to 1/60 shutter speed to be double the frame rate, which is the 180-degree shutter rule as it should generally be, so you have the smoothest output, and then around 200 ISO to help. It's still a webcam sensor. I do want to point this out. This is nearly a 1-inch sensor, but it's not quite a 1-inch sensor yet. But it is a big, beefy sensor, but it's still a webcam sensor. So high contrast setups like this, you still can end up, even in manual exposure, struggling. Like, parts of my face still get a little overexposed, and then I have to keep turning down the secondary brightness to try to compensate for it. But if I turn down the ISO anymore, then I end up looking way too dark, and we're going to get grainy. So I'll turn that down a tiny bit more as I try to compensate. As mentioned, the software is what can make or break this. They have tons of options. They have the lens distortion compensation. They have 2D and 3D noise reduction, which help a lot. I have those on. I would just recommend leaving them on. You've got options for performance versus quality coming off the webcam, because we're using MJPEG for 4K 30. We'll talk about that in a moment. And then you've got additional image presets and processing. White balance only has temperature. It doesn't have temperature and tint. I'm going to harp on this on every webcam review. You need both to properly get white balance, so I'd recommend still setting it to manual, getting as close as you can, using a gray card or a piece of paper or something, going into Resolve with my LUTs video. I'll have links below to make your own LUT to apply in OBS to fix your colors a little bit. I'll have these fixed in post, and then I'll show you a side-by-side real quick. It has all these options, but you can't control them while the webcam is in use in another program, whereas Elgato's and Insta360's does, which means that I can set it all up in Synapse, turn off the preview, open it in OBS, and the OBS, the default UVC controls, whatever it is, will override some of those settings, even though you can save them to the camera. And so I had my exposure looking perfect in Synapse, and no longer is. I have to tweak that back and forth They really need to work on this. I bring this up because the product manager for this webcam has been in a lot of YouTube comments reminding people, or telling people, answering questions and telling people that the software for this webcam, the version of Razer's apps, the support for it and stuff, is still early days, and they are still working on finalizing the public build and things like that. And it's really cool that a lot of their product managers lately have been kind of in the weeds responding to people and really making their products better for it. But they still are selling this camera to the public. This isn't an early review sample. I bought this off of their website. They started selling it day one in CES. So the software that they release now is fair to cover and criticize as a result, because this is what actual buyers are getting. Consumers had this before I did. So there is some issues with that. There's some general quirks, and there is actually a complete missing feature, which, to be fair, I think the feature is dumb, but they are advertising the ability to do uncompressed 4K in the NV12 color space, which is 420 chroma sampling. Basically, it just means it's not encoding it on the camera. Most 4K webcams, including Elgatos and Insta360s, it encodes the video to what's called MJPEG, which is just a video codec, basically a bunch of still JPEG images, to transfer over USB to your computer, because no one wants to use USB 10 gig or 20 gig ports, even though just about everyone has them that's going to buy a $300 webcam at this point. They advertise an uncompressed mode, but that uncompressed mode is only in 24 and 25 FPS, at which point you get NV12 available, which is weird because there's definitely lots of capture cards that can do 4K 30 over NV12, no problem. And that would avoid some of the latency added from the MJPEG encoding, plus help keep quality top tier, but you're limited on frame rate. However, this option isn't even available at all in the software at the moment, so that's a little frustrating. But again, they have said it's early days. Smoothness and image quality wise, it's a webcam. There's going to be some stutters sometimes depending on what you have going on over USB, and when I have all of my webcams plugged in at once, they get a little stuttery. That's not a point of reference that I'm working with. I'm just looking for sharpness and image quality and things like that. Sharpness looks incredible. Colors look pretty decent out of box. Not my favorite colors, as I mentioned in comparison, but again, with some LUT, we'll turn that back on now. Pretty decent colors out of the box. I hope they can tune the software. The depth of field from that bigger sensor is a marked improvement over the other webcams, and one of the biggest webcam looks is having all of your background in focus, which makes all that detail even harder to compress for low bitrate streams or video calls or things like that. So there's a real practical advantage to a shallow depth of field beyond just looking more artsy or blurring out your background. And I mean, if you're teaching or doing a stream, like, my background's a mess right now, and granted I have the lights off, but that blur helps keep you from noticing that because I have 5 million projects going on at once. There's a real advantage that I actually look for, and why I use full frame cameras for most of this kind of stuff anyway. But we're at the point. Razer did really good here. Razer did really good in producing something that I think everyone could appreciate once it comes out. We are at the point where most of the other 4K webcams have dropped below 300, so we're looking at 250-ish for most of the good ones, which is obviously going to be cheaper to you in the moment, but all of these webcams launched for the most part at $300, and thus, price has to come down eventually. They all launch at the $300 price point. That is expensive. You could spend that money towards, you're not going to find a full kit for $300, but if you take that $300 and save up $200 more, which is almost a whole other $300, I get that. I'm just saying, if you save up a little more, you can get a cheap capture card, HDMI cable, dummy battery, and then a mirrorless camera like the Sony a5100, the Canon M200. I have a video covering those linked below, and a lens for them. And then you have a much, much, much bigger sensor, because those are Super 35 sensors, which are much bigger. You get much shallower depth of field, better performance, manual settings, and you can pick it up to go record video on a vacation or take pictures or whatever. But a lot of people just doing meetings, conference calls, basic streams, they just want a plug and play solution. And that is why I keep covering them. And Razer has broken the limits that I thought webcams were going to be beholden to for the next few years. It's still a webcam. It's still limited in plenty of ways. But this is one of the best. Like, I will use this as a mirrorless camera replacement because I can then sell that mirrorless camera, recoup some of that money. Rough financial year, got to recoup some of that money. And virtually, especially once I get the exposure completely balanced for a specific set, which will also mean turning down my light for that specific setup, which I don't want to do in a setup optimized for a bunch of different cameras and a set point. At that point, this replaces that. Honestly, I want a couple more. I still use the Insta360 link for a few webcam scenarios because it follows me around, which for streams add that extra level of dynamicness, especially when I'm going to like pick up something to show you or whatever. Following around is really cool, but for everything else where I just want a static camera to sit there, the Kiyo Pro Ultra replaces mirrorless cameras as a webcam for me and is a lot easier to manage due to the size, which is pretty wild. I didn't think I would say that about a webcam yet, but I am happy enough looking at this, even as I'm recording it. I am content enough with how this looks that I would want it to replace my A7S II over in that setup and other things. And plus, for when I do crazy late night game streams or whatever, especially over in the house, having the blown out background and that HDR mode so I don't even have to flick on lights if I don't want to, pretty compelling. Product links, as always, will be in the description below. Go check out this video comparing 6 or 7 other webcams released in 2022 so you have the right starting place. Don't buy a product based on one video. Watch other reviews and watch reviews of competing products so you can see the complaints and the thoughts and see how they compare to each other so you can make the best decision for you. I will have that video plus my general webcam reviews playlist linked here. Remember to be kind, rewind.